So when did the Veitnam War actually begin? Well, some say it was in 1955, but really you have to go back a little bit further, back to during World War II, when the Nazis invaded France and the French surrendered. They also surrendered part of their control over the Indochina region. And that's where we're going to start. So in 1940, after the French gave control to the Nazis in turn allowed the Japanese to station their troops in the northern part of Vietnam. After the Japanese had surrendered to the Allies in 1945, the French wanted to reassert control over Vietnam. But by this time, the Viet Minh up in the north, they were beginning to get some traction, assert some dominance, especially amongst the rural communities. So in late 1945, the French started arriving back into Saigon, down in the south of Vietnam. Now the Viet Minh, they resisted that. They didn't want that to happen at all. And because they didn't want to be ruled by the French. So they sought for independence, but the French weren't willing to negotiate on that front. And really, that was the beginnings of the Troubles. So the war really began, the first Indochina War started when the French bombed the city of Haiphong up in the northern part of Vietnam, killed hundreds of civilians, and that really is what, in a roundabout way, led to the Vietnam War some about 9 years later. So from 1946 to 1949, the troops under the Vietnamese troops under Ho Chi Minh and General Biao, I think that's right, they gained control, a lot of control over the rural areas in the north and the central parts of Vietnam, which the French just couldn't counteract. So Ho Chi Minh sought and got arms and equipment from China during this time. The tactics of the French weren't really suited to the Vietnamese countryside. It can be very mountainous, and Ho Chi Minh and his generals used that to their advantage, and the French just weren't able to gain any sort of headway in the fight against the Vietnamese. So by 1950, Ho Chi Minh had established a strong governance and control over the northern and central parts of Vietnam, with a strong yet effective military structure that he used against the French very well. So the French had control over Saigon down in the south, and it pretty much turned into a civil conflict between the two. And this is about where the United States stepped in. They had the pressures of the Cold War going on, and they didn't want it. They wanted to stop the advance of communism. So they stepped in and started providing aid to the French. And at the same time, the Soviets and the Chinese, they stepped up their support to the Vietnamese in the north of the country. So in the spring of 1954, the French hatched a plan. They gained control of a small area in a valley right up in the north of the country, right up near the border with Laos and China, probably, well, not far, 100 kilometres from Laos and a couple hundred kilometres from China. And it was there that they thought they could easily beat the Vietnamese, but that wasn't the case. So the garrison at Dien Bien Phu were basically trapped, and for 56 days the Viet Minh harassed, bombarded them until the French were defeated in that battle. So that battle at Bien Dien Phu, that led to either the killing, the wounding, or the capture of 11,000 of the French troops, and that caused the French to reconsider their position here in Indochina. A wooden warrior with what is that, a falcon or an eagle? I'm not sure, could be either. So after that conflict, it all ended up at the Geneva Convention, and in July of 1954 the accord was signed in Geneva, which basically divided, they wanted to end the conflict here once and for all, and so it was decided to divide Vietnam into two sectors along the 17th parallel, which, if you didn't know, which I only just found out, it's called the 17th parallel because it's 17 degrees north of the equator. I didn't know that. Let's go back along the beach. So north of the 17th parallel was the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, and Ho Chi Minh was installed as president, while down south another government was installed with Bao Dai as emperor of the region, but he was basically a puppet under French orders, so to speak. So the accord that they both signed, that both parties signed in Geneva, was with a stipulation that elections would be held in 1956. But General Bao down in Emperor Bao down in the south, he refused to hold the elections because I guess he just assumed that the North would win, something that he just didn't want to happen. So therefore he just didn't hold the elections. So now the country was divided, north and south, and with completely opposing values and ideals, with the Democratic Republic of Vietnam in the north and the south of the country being more and more dominated, or influenced I should say, by the US down in the south. And that's really what kicked off the war between the communists of Vietnam and the rest of the world, who wanted to try and stop the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. This wind has been blowing in the train for the last 9 days. It's getting very annoying. So it was that war, the first Indochina War, that really set the stage for the Veitnam War. That's what kicked the whole thing off. The North wanting to be communist like their buddies, the Soviets and the Chinese, and the South heavily influenced by the United States of America and other international countries which just didn't want communism to take a hold here in Southeast Asia. So in the late 1950s, the Americans started to send military advisors to South Vietnam, to stop the threat of communism taking over the whole country. What they were trying to avoid was, or what they feared, was the domino effect, that first Vietnam would fall under communism, and then, or fall to communism, and then other countries would follow, Laos, Cambodia, etc. An intrusion onto Southeast Asia in the Americans' eyes of communism, which is something that they desperately wanted to avoid. By 1964, the war between the North and the South had really intensified. The North were providing support to the communist guerrilla group, the Viet Cong, down in the South, and it was presenting a big problem, something the US wanted to stop. Also in 1964 was an incident in the Gulf of Tonkin. Now the Gulf of Tonkin is way up in the north. It's basically just off the coast of China, near, I think it's Hainan Island. Not sure if I pronounced that correctly. And the northern borders of Vietnam. And that incident, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, was where the northern Vietnamese had allegedly fired torpedoes from a torpedo boat at an American destroyer that was obviously in the area. There was, a few days later, there was allegedly another incident where the same thing happened. That's very controversial because there are reports that no, that second incident never happened. It was just a ruse to allow the US government to step in and try and take control of things that were going on here in Vietnam and the rest of Southeast Asia, pretty much. These waves are getting bigger and bigger. That's not a big one, but you wouldn't want to be swimming out there at the moment. So in response to the Gulf of Tonkin incident, Lyndon B. Johnson went to Congress and pretty much demanded that US be given the right to embroil themselves into the war here in Southeast Asia. And they agreed. That's exactly what happened. So the US, they passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which allowed the USA to be directly involved in the war, send troops and equipment into the war without ever actually declaring war on Vietnam or North Vietnam. I'm not sure how that works. Seems like I don't know, it's just, how do you go send troops in without actually declaring war on a country? I guess they do it more and more often nowadays, but yeah, I don't know, that one just doesn't make any sense to me. But who am I? And that really is what pushed America into this war, the Tonkin incident. That's what started it all off, and ended up being one of America's most costly wars. They lost a lot of troops, and it was just a very, and equipment, of course, and it was just a very expensive exercise overall. Was it worth it? No, I don't think so. That's just my opinion. And that, my friends, is the beginning of the Vietnam War. It wasn't just this straightforward. It's a very complicated area when you look into it. There's been a lot going on over the years. The French have had a lot to do with it. I'm not going to say they're the cause of the conflict, but when the French are occupying your country, or if any country is occupying, any foreign entity is occupying your country, I don't think you're going to take very kindly to it. I'll leave the tale for the actual Vietnam War for another video. Tell you a little bit about Nha Trang. Nha Trang didn't have much of an involvement in the Second World War. Not a lot was happening here in Nha Trang. It was basically used, troops were landing here, supplies were landing here, but I'm pretty sure it was almost a, what do they call it, R&R, a rest and recreation area for the US troops during the Second World War. There's a plane up there somewhere, and the clouds are finally starting to part. We've got a bit of sun coming through. First time I've seen it in 9 days. So I would have liked to recorded this in front of some remnants or a museum of World War II or the Veitnam War, but as I said, the Trang is pretty much here on the coast all by itself, and not a lot happened here. There was a lot of there was huge famine. A lot of people died in all of Vietnam. They estimate well over 2 million people died of famine, caused directly or indirectly by the wars that had gone on over the years. And in all, really, the country of Vietnam has been involved in many, many wars. Alright, thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. I don't do too many stories like this, as you could probably tell. Alright, see you in the next one. Bye bye.